200 feet, and we will be breathing the thin air at the summit of a peak rising over 14,000 feet into the sky. We've ascended 4,300 feet through dense forests, up steep alpine tundra, along a talus-covered ridge, and across a narrow, treacherous snow cornice. Only 200 feet to go. Every muscle in our bodies is taxed. Adrenaline courses through our veins. Days of preparation have gone into the success of this endeavor. The top is in view, a white tooth piercing the sky. It is steps away. And we have to give up and go down. There is too much risk to continue. As we turn from the summit and begin to descend, there is anguish on our faces, but fire in our souls. Has the mountain conquered us? Or will we try again and overcome and stand on the summit of a 14,000-foot peak in the mountains of Colorado? In this video, watch the story of our long battle with the 14ers and discover the winner, and the many things we've learned in the process. Learn about a world very different from our own, and about another real world beyond this life. Our story with the mountains begins many years ago, when we children were quite young and we lived in a house in one place instead of traveling full-time in an RV. We would take a vacation every year near Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. The mountain that we would climb every year, Massanutten Mountain, a strangely shaped tree-covered peak in the Blue Ridge Mountains, was not a walk in the park. In fact, at the time, it was a great feat to reach the ski resort at the top and stand at the overlook above the valley far below. Some of us kids were still in diapers, making the feat greater for some in the family than for others. But that was not our first real mountain. A real mountain, as we define it, must go above treeline. It was our first summer on the road, and here we were on the rocky slopes of Mount Jefferson in the White Mountains of northern New Hampshire. As we neared treeline, we chattered to each other about the signs and about the trees that were becoming gradually shorter and stubbier. We are in the Alpine Zone. We're going to be above treeline. To this day, we believe there is no feeling quite like stepping above the last tiny spruce sapling and entering the free, open world of the mountains. With relative ease, we scrambled up the boulders and gained the summit to behold our first 360-degree view. So by the time we were driving into Colorado and viewing the Rocky Mountains for the first time, and as we gazed up at the snowy summits towering above us, it did not cross our minds that we might fail. We were fit, active hikers who had completed some truly strenuous trails. And we had summited a peak in the White Mountains, no less, and it had been easier than we'd expected. Yes, climbing a 14er might be significantly more difficult, but if we stuck it out and persevered, if we trained and bought gear and brought plenty of snacks, we would be successful. And that is why it was so devastating when we had to turn around on the slopes of 14,001-foot Sunshine Peak in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. At that point, we realized that there was going to be more to this than mere perseverance. And in the years to come, we would see, oh so clearly, that there are other factors to consider. Factors like weather, from howling blizzards to terrifying thunderstorms to fierce winds. Factors like snow, narrow cornices, deep infuriating drifts, and avalanches. Factors like altitude and the debilitating and sometimes life-threatening effects which it can have on a person's body. And so we did not summit a 14er on our second attempt either. No, Handy's Peak, 14,048 feet, also in the San Juan Mountains, seemed an even more dismal failure as we turned around 900 vertical feet from our goal. Part of the reason for not succeeding in this case was that the road to the trailhead had been so deadly that we had begun the trail impossibly late. But the biggest factor was, again, snow. Snow is a fickle foe. It behaves differently every time you encounter it. Sometimes snow is soft, deep, and slushy, and you are forced to turn around simply because there is not enough time in a day to wade for miles through waist-deep drifts and still reach home before nightfall. Snow above treeline can gather on sun-baked slopes and conceal deep holes in the rocks below. This was the problem on Handy's Peak, as the snow was so deep that any holes beneath could have buried us above our heads, and the late afternoon sun was making the snow softer by the minute. Snow can blow over ridgelines and freeze into fantastic cornices which can collapse under some conditions and cause peril to anyone traversing on top. This was part of the reason we turned around on Sunshine Peak, a narrow cornice followed by rapidly melting deep snow. And to top it all off, snow can become an avalanche when a slope is the right angle. Despite all these obstacles which snow poses, we were determined to summit a peak in winter conditions during the snowy months of April or May. And so we came back the next year with all the gear necessary for climbing in the snow. Snowshoes to keep us afloat on the melting drifts, microspikes to provide traction on steep slick slopes, gaiters to keep snow from getting into the top of our boots, information about avalanche conditions, and ice axes for climbing, for glissading, and for stopping a fall in the case of a slip. Yet even these did not guarantee success. Starting at 3:36 in the morning did not result in a summit. Unbelievable stamina did not do the trick. No, none of these things did anything against gale force winds and a life-threatening case of altitude sickness on the east ridge of the wild and formidable Humboldt Peak, 14,068 feet, in the Sangre de Cristo Range. Once again, we turned away from the narrow ridge sweeping up to the summit and wondered whether this goal was even possible for us, whether we could do it at all. Were the odds too great? Altitude, snow, weather, steep terrain, long approaches against one family? Was it impossible? Through all these failed attempts, we were learning things. Oh yes, we learned things that were useful for the sport of mountaineering. We learned that you have to start in the dark hours of the morning in order to summit before afternoon weather rolls in and the snow begins to melt. We learned techniques like the glissade, the self-arrest, the self-belay, and the traverse. But we learned mental techniques as well. We were learning how to push ourselves beyond our limits for the sake of children, siblings, and parents who were striving for the same goal. And perhaps more importantly, we were learning when to let go of our ambitions for the sake of children, siblings, and parents who might be endangered if we continued. Mount Elbert in the Sawatch Range, the tallest peak in Colorado, became our fourth attempt. At 3:15 a.m., we were pounding out steps up a steep road leading to the trailhead. When you do not have a four-wheel drive vehicle, when you have a van like us, you have to start lower and hike on narrow roads that trucks and jeeps and ATVs can drive up. In Colorado, there are often two trailheads, a lower one that two-wheel drive vehicles can reach, and a higher one that only four-wheel drive vehicles can access. Needless to say, it is rather disheartening to be toiling up a four-wheel drive road while jeeps and trucks roll past you. We reached snow just after beginning the ascent of the peak. Having started early in the frosty morning, we did not need our snowshoes because we could hike on top of hard-packed frozen snow. As we climbed higher and higher, we reached treeline just as the morning rays were beginning to pierce the sky. Treeline at sunrise. We were making incredible time. Could we succeed this time? We pushed down the anticipation and focused on putting one foot in front of the other on the steepening slopes. Focused on enjoying the time with each other. Focused on what mattered, and hoped that we would reach the summit. At about 13,100 feet, we stopped to pull slices of pizza out of our bags. Real fuel. Carbs. Fuel that beats candy bars and protein bars and trail mix any day. And we continued, and the summit loomed into view, and the slope steepened. Our lungs gasped. Our legs burned. Our ice axes supported us in our unstoppable resolve, in our concerted effort, in our united determination. And then, On the descent, we faced a blizzard and a thunderstorm, as if the mountain were trying to remind us who was really the boss. We sloshed and slid down all the way we had come, and when we were back on the four-wheel drive road heading toward the van, we passed two campers and heard one tell the other, no, they didn't. They couldn't have made it. We smiled at each other, stood a little taller, and mentally high-fived. Yes, we had done it. Were we satisfied? Had we won? Not quite. The sweeping shark fin of Humboldt Peak still loomed large in our memories. Sometimes you fail on a mountain and you don't care much to try again. And others, you feel as if you cannot rest until you have tried again and conquered. Humboldt Peak was one of those mountains. But Humboldt is much harder than Elbert. It is longer, requiring 16.5 miles of steep hiking. It is steeper, involving 5,300 feet of climbing. And it is wilder, famous for its whipping winds, sudden storms, and remoteness. To reach the summit of this peak would be nothing short of miraculous. There is another mountain which we have not yet told you about, a beautiful jagged peak in the San Juan Mountains known as Mount Sneffels. We had been on this mountain twice before. The first time we had not even been attempting to summit. There was so much snow that we thought if we could just make it to one of the lakes in the basin below, we would be satisfied. But of course there was the nagging thought at the back of our minds that we might just summit. As it turned out, we were, of course, right about too much snow. We tried again the next year. We weren't originally planning on summiting this time either, but we ended up on the standard route to the top, and we turned around again before an imposing steep snow gully. Those climbers with the harnesses and large crampons could do it, but not us. No, this mountain was beautiful to look at, but there was no way we would ever stand on the summit of such a technical challenge as Mount Sneffels. On Mount Elbert, we had conquered a 14er. Could we conquer these two far greater nemeses? As we gazed upon the lofty mountain from our campground near Westcliff, Colorado, we truly thought it was impossible, but we had to make one final try on Humboldt Peak. In the wee hours of the morning, we hoisted our packs, weighed down with winter gear, onto our backs and began the long approach into the heart of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. We were taking the West Ridge route this time. Our thinking was that, if we did not summit the peak, we would at least pass beneath some of the most majestic mountains in Colorado, the Crestones. There is not much to say about the first part of the trek. The hours passed as we hiked up the steep, rocky four-wheel drive road through the dark forest. We eventually hit snow and had to do a bit of wading. Then, as the sun rose, we entered the magical world of the South Colony Lakes and beheld the Crestones in all their splendor. We were tired already. Freezing wind penetrated our very bones as we sat down for a rest. The approach hike had almost worn us out. But as we looked around at each other, we knew that we could continue. It was worth the hike to be just right here, to share this wonderful spectacle together. In our minds, we pushed aside the summit. We will not make it. Just enjoy right now. Enjoy the views. Enjoy the beautiful weather. And keep walking. And we did keep walking. We overcame the incredibly steep slope leading to the Humboldt Crestone Saddle. We trudged through snow and over talus along the steep rough ridge sweeping up toward a false summit. And once we crested this first point, we knew that victory would be ours. We lifted ourselves over the last rock, and this time there were no shouts, no cheers, no fanfare. We were too exhausted. Kelly, quoting the words of the famous Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton, quietly said, "We've done it, boys." Although Humboldt Peak is the hardest of the three mountains we have discussed so far, Mount Sneffels is in a category all its own. Sneffels is what is known as a Class 3, which designates the beginning stages of technical rock climbing. Though the term Class 3 means that the climbing is easy enough to not require ropes or anchors, it does not convey other factors such as snow conditions or exposure. So despite our previous successes, we were not optimistic about reaching the top of this peak when we set out into the stunning Yankee Boy Basin in June of 2025. Yes, we had hiking skills and stamina and experience with altitude and snow travel expertise, but we did not have Class 3 experience. We did not have experience with a mountain this scary, this exposed. Remembering the terrifying snow gully of the previous year, we knew that, although this mountain would be difficult in the dry months, we might not have the necessary gear to summit in June, when large snow patches still lingered. It might come as a surprise to you that, this time, we were on the harder route to the summit of Mount Sneffels, the spiny southwest ridge. The reason for this is that, while it may be more technically challenging than the standard route, it is more fun than the steep, loose slopes of the standard route. Our reasoning was that we could go as high as possible and turn around before it got too sketchy. It would be better to be on an open ridge and turn around than inside a confined gully and turn around. We hiked through the basin and up to a beautiful pass. The weather was perfect. We began the ascent of the southwest ridge. It was difficult, lots of loose rock and some snow traverses. But then we got to a spot that looked impossible. A deadly-looking snow slope that dropped down steeply off to our right and that was surrounded by impassable cliffs. And we would have turned around there if it had not been for an old fellow who had climbed the peak many times. He was returning from the summit and gave us advice as to how to proceed. He tramped up the snow slope in sneakers, commented on our ice axes, and asked if we knew how to self-arrest. Yes, we knew how to do this. We had the skills to handle this. And so we strapped on our microspikes, leashed our ice axes to our wrists, and passed this obstacle. After another steep snow section, we came to the crux of the route, which is the term for the hardest part. With considerable difficulty, we braced our feet on tiny footholds and shimmied up through a steep notch. Because of how challenging the crux had turned out to be, we knew that we would not be descending this route. It would be much harder to come down here than it had been to come up, and going up had been hard enough. We would have to descend the dreaded snow gully where we had turned around last year and continue down the standard route on the south slopes. So we passed onto the narrow but delightfully solid ridge that would eventually culminate in the pointed top of Mount Sneffels. Mount Sneffels, this ferocious yet fiercely beautiful peak, would soon be ours. Then we got off route. Instead of staying on top of the ridge, we followed the advice of other hikers whose tips we had read online, and we traversed along the south face of the mountain. And we almost got stuck on the definitely harder than Class 3 rock that we encountered on this section. Thankfully, another helpful old climber guided us back to a notch in the ridge that we had missed, and we continued along the top, finding it much easier going. The summit came as a surprise. It almost felt unreal to be standing on this small circlet of rocks surrounded by a sea of jagged snow-covered peaks. To be looking out over the great expansive plains of Colorado to the north. Colorado, the state that had introduced us to the world, the wild, free world of the mountains. A world of extremes. A world that eclipses the real world for a brief time, that transports you to a realm higher and brighter and freer than ours. The mountains remind us that there is indeed another world, a world higher and brighter and freer than our own. Whether you believe it or not, like it or not, accept it or not, there is a heaven, an eternal place of happiness and light where the creator of the universe, of the snowy ridges and distant galaxies and magnificent sun, dwells. There is another place called hell that must also exist. The high and glorious judge of all mankind has appointed it as a place of punishment for the devil and for all who disobey God's laws by stealing, lying, committing sexual sin, or any other sin. God is just and unfathomably holy. He cannot let sin, your sin, go unpunished. Yet he is also love, and he sent his Son, Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, to become a lowly human being and die a cruel death on a cross, in your place, instead of you. He took the wrath of God on himself so that you could walk away free. God can now justly grant you mercy because of his sacrifice. Then Christ was buried and rose again to glory, where he sits on the right hand of God's throne as preparing a home for all who repent and trust in his sacrifice as the only way to be rescued from God's anger. Jesus is the only way to God. Striving, religious works, nothing can lead you to the summit, to heaven, except the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we beg you today, dear viewer, to begin a trip to the mountains today, to leave behind the old, useless, meaningless way that leads to hell, and to take the way to the cross and to the Savior, to the ultimate summit. And we are asking you to live today for that truer, brighter, freer world, where there is no pain, nor crying, nor tears. Whatever it takes, keep your eyes on that summit, and someday you will step onto it, claim it as your very own, and you will never ever come down.
It's finally here!
Yay!
Our book, Expect the Unexpected, is now available for purchase.
1 RV, 7 people, 50 states. What could possibly go wrong?
Try to keep disaster at a minimum.
When we first had the idea, none of us could have imagined what it would be like to sell everything and explore the country in a travel trailer. From one harrowing and sometimes hilarious adventure to the next, we tackle the challenges of living on the road. And what seems like a string of disasters turns out to be a series of lessons in trusting a God who keeps his promises and takes care of his children. Purchase your copy today by clicking the link in the description below or by searching wherever books are sold online.